On a warm July day in 1990, four kiddos ventured out to pick berries in the woods of rural Pennsylvania. Wandering near an old railroad trestle in Monroe Township in Pennsylvania, they stumbled upon a chilling discovery. Lying face down in a muddy creek bed was what they first assumed to be a deer carcass. The group soon realized they had found something much more sinister. It was a human body. The victim was a young woman, and to this day her true name remains unknown. Investigators came to call her the Penny Doe, a haunting nickname drawn from the only coins found on her, a penny in each pocket of her jeans. This anonymous victim, found in the remote wilds of Clarion County in 1990, has since become the center of a decades-long mystery. An autopsy and crime scene examination yielded both clues and more questions. The victim was a white female, small in stature, with shoulder-length brown hair. Investigators determined she had been dead for approximately 2 months before the discovery, meaning she likely died in late spring or early summer of 1990. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. She had been beaten, suffering a devastating blow to the right side of her skull. She also had a broken right leg, yet another injury consistent with an extremely violent assault. Detectives found no purse or identification at the scene, and in fact, the young woman had very little with her. She wore a black short-sleeved shirt with a floral print vest, along with size 9 jeans. She had no shoes or socks on, or any undergarments, leading police to wonder if those items had been removed by the perpetrator to prevent biological evidence being found. Aside from her clothing, the only items recovered were the pennies in her pockets, a poignant detail that led to her moniker, the Penny Doe. Determining the victim's identity became the investigators' top priority. Initial forensic analysis in 1990 placed her age somewhere between her early 20s to early middle age. However, the physical evidence suggested a younger profile. The woman had healthy teeth with no obvious dental work or decay, and there was even a baby tooth still present in her upper jaw. These features were more typical of someone in her 20s rather than a woman in her late 30s. In fact, decades later, a fresh anthropological review of her skull and bones would narrow her likely age to roughly 22 to 29 years old, and her height to about 5 feet 3 inches. One front tooth was found to be chipped, though examiners couldn't be sure if that happened before death or during the violence inflicted upon her. These details painted a basic physical portrait, but nothing that immediately rang a bell in missing person databases. No local woman of that description had been reported missing. The mystery victim did not match any obvious cases in Pennsylvania, suggesting she might have come from elsewhere. With few leads, police turned to broader investigative methods. They widely distributed a composite sketch and even commissioned a full forensic facial reconstruction, in hopes that someone would recognize the young woman's face. Despite these efforts, no one stepped forward to name her. From early on, police theorized that the key to the mystery might lie in the local community. The location where the Penny Doe was dumped was not easily happened upon by a stranger. It was a seldom traveled back road in a rural township, the kind of spot one might only find if they knew the area or explored off the beaten path. This led investigators to suspect that the killer could be someone local, someone familiar with that isolated creek bed. At the same time, they doubted the victim herself was from Clarion County. No one in the vicinity had reported a relative or friend missing who matched her. Further, they speculated that her style of clothing and brands weren't especially common in the area. Authorities believe she may have been brought into the region not long before her death, perhaps only a few weeks beforehand. In fact, one hypothesis emerged that Memorial Day weekend that year might hold a clue. On May 27, 1990, A large outdoor rock concert had been held about 15 miles from the spot where the penny dough was found. Over 5,000 people attended that event, and it was speculated that the unknown woman could have been among them. Some have speculated that she could have been from the western part of the country. Others have speculated that she could have been from a much more exotic locale, a little place to the north known as Canada. Under this theory, she might have traveled from elsewhere to attend the concert, and then crossed paths with a dangerous individual afterwards. Or perhaps she was trafficked to the concert location for more sinister purposes. However, this theory remained circumstantial, and there was no hard evidence she was at the show, and no attendee reports that clearly described her. It was an intriguing scenario, but ultimately just one of many possibilities. Still, the idea reinforced investigators' belief that someone in the area might have encountered this Jane Doe in the weeks before her slaying. As time passed, the case grew cold, with no further leads to pursue. Then, in the summer of 2003, a sudden hint of progress came out of nowhere. Authorities received an anonymous letter from someone claiming to have information about the young woman. The content of the letter has never been fully disclosed, but it was significant enough that police went public to plead for the mystery writer to contact them again. Investigators were hopeful that this could be the break they needed. Perhaps it was from someone with a guilty conscience, or a community member who had overheard a vital rumor. Unfortunately, that hope was dashed when the letter's author never came forward beyond the initial cryptic message. The anonymous tip faded into the background, leaving detectives to wonder if it had been a cruel prank or a missed chance at solving the case. By the 2020s, DNA technology and genetic genealogy had revolutionized the way unidentified remains can be identified. The Clarion County Coroner's Office, in collaboration with experts, worked to extract DNA from the penny doe's remains. Right now, this is where the case stands, and it's unclear where this genetic genealogy effort has led. It's also unclear if the Clarion County authorities have retained a service such as Othram to attempt to crack this case. With a little bit of attention focused on her case, the Penny Jane Doe can, at the very least, be given her name back. Whether her case can be solved from that point onwards remains unclear at present. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that any biological material from the perpetrator was found at the scene, which will make cracking the case that much more difficult. But with her identity back, beyond the dignity it gives to her, this will allow investigators to start reconstructing this young woman's last days. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family that enjoy mysteries and true crime content. Also, don't forget to follow my podcast, check out my merch store, and look into my other channels. Just click the links in the description below. And as always, if you have a case you'd like to see profiled, don't forget to leave a comment. John Dillinger was an American gangster who became a household name during the Great Depression. Between June 1933 and July 1934, Dillinger and his gang terrorized the Midwest, robbing banks and police armories, staging jailbreaks, and engaging in shootouts. He was implicated in at least 10 slayings and multiple injuries to law enforcement officers. Dillinger's headline-grabbing heists transformed him into a notorious folk figure. In response to public fascination and his escalating crimes, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover named Dillinger Public Enemy Number 1, making the outlaw a priority target for federal agents. By mid-1934, Dillinger was America's most wanted criminal, his exploits romanticized in newspapers, even as authorities closed in on him. According to official records, John Dillinger met his end on July 22, 1934, outside Chicago's Biograph Theater. That evening, Dillinger went to see the gangster film Manhattan melodrama with two women, Polly Hamilton, his girlfriend at the time, and Anna Sage. Unbeknownst to Dillinger, Anna Sage had secretly alerted law enforcement to his whereabouts. Sage had arranged to lead Dillinger into a trap and point him out to agents in hopes of collecting a $5,000 reward. This was the equivalent of over $100,000 today, which, all things considered, seems fairly low for the risks involved in taking out a high-profile organized crime figure. Local police and FBI agents under Agent Melvin Purvis set up an ambush outside the theater. Around 10:30 p.m., as Dillinger exited the Biograph with the two women, Purvis signaled the attack by lighting a cigar. Dillinger sensed the trap and attempted to flee, reportedly reaching for a pistol in his pocket, at least according to the official narrative. In response, a group of agents opened fire, pumping Dillinger full of lead. Dillinger collapsed to the pavement, and he was quickly taken to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead at around 11 that evening. Notably, throngs of curious onlookers gathered to glimpse Dillinger's corpse, with some dipping handkerchiefs in his blood as morbid souvenirs. The body was publicly identified as John Dillinger and was put on display for a time, in part to convince a fascinated public that the outlaw was truly dead. He was buried in Crown Hill Cemetery in his hometown of Indianapolis. Fearing grave robbers and relic hunters, Dillinger's family later had his coffin reinterred under a protective cap of concrete and iron, topped by heavy concrete slabs. This unusual step likely wasn't a bad idea, considering that people were willing to soak up his blood at the scene where he was shot down. By all official accounts, the story seemed closed. John Dillinger was dead and buried in 1934, and the FBI's top gangland nemesis was no more. Almost immediately after Dillinger's shooting, whispers began to circulate that the FBI might have gotten the wrong man. Such theories often spring up around larger-than-life figures, much as rumors later claimed that Elvis Presley or Michael Jackson had faked their deaths. In Dillinger's case, a number of odd discrepancies and inconsistencies were noted in the aftermath of the shooting. These fueled speculation that the man killed at the Biograph Theater was not John Dillinger at all. One of the first puzzling details was the corpse's eye color. Contemporary morgue records from 1934 listed the dead man's eyes as brown, yet Dillinger was known to have had gray-blue eyes. This discrepancy was highlighted in a Cook County coroner's report rediscovered decades later. Medical experts cautioned that eye color can appear clouded or darker after death. There were other physical mismatches as well. The body in the morgue had none of Dillinger's well-documented scars or past bullet wound marks, according to accounts of the autopsy. Dillinger, who was 31, had been injured several times during his criminal career, and even underwent clandestine plastic surgery while on the run in an attempt to alter his appearance. Yet the autopsy report supposedly noted no signs of recent facial surgery on the body. Notably, the corpse was also said to have fingerprints, despite Dillinger allegedly having physically removed his own fingerprints with acid. Theorists argue that if Dillinger had truly undergone facial alteration and tried to remove his fingerprints, the lack of surgical scars and the intact prints on the body make little sense. That is, unless it was someone else's body entirely. Perhaps most striking, the autopsy noted that the dead man suffered from a chronic heart condition that had scarred his heart since childhood. Dillinger, however, was by all accounts a very healthy fellow, having played semi-pro baseball, and was known for athletic feats during robberies and prison breaks. A person with advanced heart disease would likely have been severely limited, which didn't match Dillinger's lifestyle. This detail of a bad heart in the corpse raised eyebrows. Additionally, some witnesses remarked that the body appeared shorter and heavier than Dillinger's known build. Even Dillinger's facial features, such as the shape of the ears and the front teeth, were reported to differ from known photos of the outlaw. Such claims, though anecdotal, bolstered the idea that something was off in the official story. At the time, law enforcement attributed any minor differences to Dillinger's attempts at disguise. The FBI pointed out that Dillinger had grown a mustache, dyed his hair, and undergone plastic surgery to remove identifying moles and scars, which could account for a changed appearance. They also emphasized that fingerprints taken from the body matched Dillinger's fingerprints on record, seemingly settling the matter. According to the FBI, agents at the scene obtained 2 sets of prints from the corpse, which both positively identified Dillinger. They also confirmed a 3rd matching set was taken during the official autopsy. The FBI discounted the idea that Dillinger had ever removed his fingerprints, suggesting that this was part of the myth-making surrounding this outlaw. These forensic matches, in the Bureau's view, were definitive proof that the correct man was killed. However, skeptics have long alleged that this fingerprint evidence might have been falsified or mishandled. The reason for this, according to theorists, is that the FBI blasted a Dillinger look-alike and then planted evidence to save face. Effectively, they needed to cover up blasting a doppelganger down on the streets of Chicago. According to this theory, Dillinger, realizing that the FBI had taken the bait either intentionally or to save face, decided it was a good time to quit his life of crime. Other rumors and anecdotal reports have added to the legend. In the years following 1934, there were occasional claims of Dillinger sightings around the country, as often happens with infamous figures whose deaths some refuse to believe. It was said, for instance, that Dillinger's sister suddenly began taking trips to California in the late 1930s, sparking talk that she was secretly visiting her fugitive brother. Some members of Dillinger's own family long harbored doubts about the body, believing it wasn't really him. In fact, when Dillinger's father first viewed the corpse in Chicago, he reportedly blurted that it did not look like his son. He noticed unfamiliar features like differently shaped eyes and a changed physique, according to later retellings. However, according to the official narrative, this is because Dillinger had deliberately undergone plastic surgery to alter his appearance. Further, skeptics note that bodies and facial features change rapidly post-mortem, which combined with the surgery could have resulted in him looking entirely different. For mainstream historians and the FBI, John Dillinger's fate has never truly been in question. The consensus is that Dillinger died that night in Chicago, and the survival theories are viewed as far-fetched urban legends surrounding this larger-than-life bandit. And of course, it's necessary to note that Dillinger is one of the most notorious criminals in American history. Much like Billy the Kid or Butch Cassidy or any other famous outlaw, the stories about him have just continued to grow in the last century or so. Notably, Dillinger still has numerous living relatives, and in 2019, they attempted to literally dig up the past and run DNA tests to confirm things once and for all. However, this was stopped when another faction of the Dillinger family went ahead and started a legal dispute to stop the exhumation process. Apparently, those Dillingers sure are a contentious bunch, even to this day. In the end, whether John Dillinger truly died on that Chicago street or lived on under an alias may never be conclusively proven, barring DNA testing. Picture a typical Saturday evening in southern England on November 26, 1977. Families are gathered around their television sets, or tellies to use the local lingo. The children are waiting for cartoons or some form of real entertainment, while their parents are watching the early evening news. At around 5:10, during a routine news report on Southern television, the picture wavers, and the broadcast is abruptly interrupted. The voice of the newsreader falls silent, overtaken by a crackling buzz. In its place comes a strange, distorted voice, calm but distinctly unnatural, echoing through living rooms across the region. This is the voice of Virillion, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, the voice proclaims. For nearly 6 minutes, this mysterious presence delivers a message unlike anything heard on the evening news. It warns that humanity must renounce conflict and nukes and learn to live in peace to avoid some imminent disaster. The speaker talks of an upcoming Age of Aquarius and urges listeners to take heed, saying we have only a short time to turn away from conflict. The tone is polite but firm, at once soothing and spine-chilling. Many viewers feel a jolt of disbelief and a hint of fear. For those frozen minutes, an ordinary night becomes a scene from science fiction. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the eerie transmission stops. Normal programming resumes and the bizarre voice vanishes. Southern Television quickly apologizes for a technical fault, and the broadcast resumes as normal. In search of answers, investigators from the Independent Broadcasting Authority examined the transmission. They soon found evidence that someone hijacked the broadcast signal. Southern Television's network had a relay transmitter that picked up the station's feed over the air, rather than by secure landline, which made it vulnerable to interference. A clever intruder apparently exploited this weakness. By transmitting a powerful signal of their own at just the right frequency, they overrode the legitimate broadcast with the so-called Virillion message. Pulling off this feat would have required significant technical know-how and equipment. Despite extensive investigations, the perpetrators were never identified. Whoever orchestrated the hoax, assuming it was indeed one, left no trace and never stepped forward to confess. With the culprit a mystery, several theories emerged to explain the strange broadcast. One popular explanation is that it was indeed an elaborate hoax carried out by tech-savvy pranksters. In this scenario, a group of electronics enthusiasts or rogue broadcasters deliberately beamed out the fake alien message to see what would happen. They may have chosen the TV news hour for maximum impact, crafting the content to mimic sci-fi tropes, or to send a dramatic pro-peace statement. All the technical evidence supports the hoax theory. Everything that occurred could be achieved by human means, and similar signal intrusions have happened elsewhere, both before and after. Another theory takes the broadcast at face value. Perhaps some suggest it really was what it claimed to be, a message from an extraterrestrial intelligence. In the late 1970s, fascination with UFOs was widespread, and a number of viewers believed an alien or higher power might have genuinely cut into the broadcast to deliver an urgent warning. Believers in this theory thought an advanced civilization may have chosen this unconventional method to communicate. It sounds far-fetched to many, including myself, but this theory persists in UFO enthusiast circles. However, aside from the dramatic claim of the voice itself, no evidence supports an extraterrestrial origin. Investigators found nothing to suggest that the message came from anywhere other than a terrestrial transmitter. For most observers, the alien hypothesis, while intriguing, is not grounded in any verifiable facts. Yet another idea is that the incident was a secret government experiment or test. According to this theory, some government agency could have staged a fake alien broadcast to observe public reaction or to test emergency communications. It's conceivable that authorities in the Cold War era might have been curious about how citizens would respond to a sudden extraterrestrial scenario. Perhaps the message was a planned drill in psychological warfare or a test of how easily the media system could be infiltrated. This notion has been floated by conspiracy theorists, but it remains purely speculative. No official body has ever acknowledged anything of the sort. In fact, the broadcasting regulators themselves were clearly scrambling to find out what happened, which they likely would not have needed to do had it been an internally planned test. Without evidence or documentation, the secret experiment theory also remains an unsupported fringe idea. In the view of most people, the simplest theory, that human pranksters were behind the broadcast, remains by far the most convincing. There was nothing really groundbreaking in the Varillian signal intrusion, and it was pretty standard New Age talking points. Whether this was pranksters or some sort of massive social experiment is of course a much more interesting question, which remains an unsolved mystery at present. On a late summer day in 1986, a farmer tending his cornfield in rural Illinois made a gruesome discovery. Amid the rustling stalks just outside the tiny village of Summerfield, he stumbled upon the body of a young woman. She had been strangled with a piece of her own clothing, and the brutality didn't end there. The perpetrator had savagely slashed and mutilated her pelvic area in what appeared to be a disturbed ritualistic attack. Small boot prints, the kind left by a relatively petite, Western-style boot, dotted the soil around the body, as if the attacker had paced around after disposing of his victim. There were also odd personal items scattered nearby, including articles of clothing, a set of silverware, and even a salt and pepper shaker. This suggested that the perp had dumped out the contents of a travel bag. There were no obvious defensive wounds on the victim, suggesting she may have been taken by surprise or rendered helpless almost immediately. This was a crime of disturbing savagery, the kind that leaves even seasoned investigators shaken. And yet, in those first hours, this horrifying scene posed more questions than answers. Who was this young woman, and who could have done such a disturbing act? She carried no identification, and no one immediately came forward to claim her. With her name a mystery, police in St. Clair County dubbed her the Summerfield Jane Doe, after the nearest town to the cornfield where she was found. An autopsy would later determine she was likely in her 20s and had been killed only a day or less before being found. In the days and weeks following the discovery, local newspapers circulated composite sketches of the unknown woman's face and descriptions of her distinctive features. She was small in stature with brown hair and a few unique scars, details that investigators painstakingly noted in case they matched any missing persons reports. Police canvassed the region and checked bulletins for missing young women, but the victim didn't fit neatly into any report. It was as if she had simply been traveling through and vanished without anyone knowing. With no identification, this brutal slaying case went cold far too quickly. In 2007, over 2 decades after the event, St. Clair County authorities undertook the exhumation of the Summerfield Jane Doe's remains. The goal was twofold: to apply modern forensic techniques, including DNA analysis, and to capture new forensic anthropology data that might aid identification. During this process, a critical discovery was made, one that finally cracked the mystery of her identity. Investigators realized that a mistake had been made back in 1986 when the victim's fingerprints were originally cataloged. Using improved fingerprint databases, including the FBI's Advanced National System, the team resubmitted her prints. This time they got a hit. The Summerfield Jane Doe was actually Eulalia Chavez. The revelation of Chavez's identity in 2007 brought to light a poignant backstory. Eulalia Chavez had lived a life that could easily place her in harm's way, which sadly may explain how she crossed paths with a disturbed individual. Born in 1959, Chavez spent her early years in Costa Rica before being adopted, along with her brother, by an American family in Palo Alto, California. By her mid-teens, she was struggling to adjust and began running away from home frequently. In 1975, around age 16, Eulalia left home for what would be the final time, effectively disappearing from her adoptive family's day-to-day life. Over the next decade, she lived a transient, free-spirited lifestyle on the road. Family members later reported that she hitchhiked back and forth across the country, often following rock bands and chasing the next concert or adventure. In fact, investigators learned that around the time of her death, Chavez may have been in the Midwest to attend a music event in the St. Louis area. There were even rumors that she was a Grateful Dead fan traveling from show to show. This detail that, if true, put her squarely in a subculture of wanderers and hitchhikers in the 1980s, some of whom sadly fell victim to violence on the road. Chavez also had a young daughter during these years, a child she had entrusted to others' care while she roamed. Tragically, by 1986, Eulalia's family had not seen her in years. That hope was extinguished with the cold certainty of the fingerprint match in 2007. After 21 years of not knowing, Eulalia Chavez's loved ones learned her fate. She was the nameless woman brutally slain in that Illinois cornfield so long ago. Identifying Eulalia Chavez was a huge breakthrough for law enforcement. It not only gave the victim her dignity and name back, but it also breathed new life into the investigation to find the perpetrator. Investigators reopened the case with renewed determination. They now had a starting point. Chavez's background and travels could yield clues about whom she was with or where she was in early September 1986. One major theory that gained traction was that Eulalia Chavez had fallen victim to a serial predator prowling the Midwest in the 1980s. Many investigators' eyes eventually fell squarely on Larry Hall, a man who combined his love of traveling for historical reenactments with a penchant of predation. Hall is an infamous figure, a convicted kidnapper and serial offender from Indiana, who is strongly suspected of slaying numerous women across several states during the 1980s. By the time Chavez was identified in 2007, Hall was already behind bars, serving a life sentence in a federal prison for the 1993 slaying. His known crime involved luring a young victim into his vehicle and strangling her, dumping her body in a remote area, an MO not unlike what happened to Chavez. Over the years, Hall had also been linked to or confessed to dozens of other crimes, though he often later recanted those admissions. Astonishingly, in 2008, Hall wrote a letter to a TV reporter in which he explicitly claimed responsibility for slaying Eulalia Chavez. In that letter, Hall allegedly described how he picked up a female hitchhiker in the exact area around the same time and ended her in brutal fashion. Such a confession, if true, would directly solve the case. However, Hall's credibility was dubious. He had a history of both confessing to crimes and then disavowing those statements later. Detectives went to interview Hall in prison as part of a revamped investigation and even obtained a DNA sample directly from him. They hoped science might succeed where his slippery words did not. The forensic comparison was conducted between Hall's DNA and whatever genetic material could be recovered from Chavez's remains or clothing. The test didn't yield a definitive match due to the degraded nature of the biological material. This was not an exoneration of Hall, but it stopped short of the conclusive evidence investigators wanted. It's unclear at this point if this degraded DNA has been submitted for further analysis, in light of significant updates in forensic DNA tech in the intervening period. Other well-known perpetrators have also been considered, but as yet, no one else has attracted the same level of attention as Hall. Nearly 40 years have passed since Eulalia Chavez was slain, and her case remains officially unsolved. However, it is anything but inactive, and cold case detectives and FBI agents continue to collaborate in the search for definitive evidence that could close this case for good. Notably, in May 2025, the FBI released a special VICAP bulletin seeking information on the case. This indicates that the FBI likely has significant evidence to suggest that the individual who participated in the attack was a serial offender. For decades, she was known only by a haunting nickname, Sahara Sue. In 1979, a young woman was found in the Las Vegas desert, and her identity remained a mystery for 44 years. Only recently did investigators discover her real name, Gwen Story, a 19-year-old from Ohio whose journey west ended in tragedy. Now that Gwen has her name back, the focus has shifted to uncovering who ended her life and why. On the night of August 14, 1979, a passerby made a grim discovery in an empty lot off the Las Vegas Strip. Lying face down in the dirt near the old El Rancho Hotel site at Sahara Avenue and Las Vegas Boulevard was the body of a young woman. She had been dead only a few hours, and the cause of death was immediately clear: multiple stab wounds to her abdomen. Because she was found near the Sahara Hotel, investigators gave her the placeholder name Sahara Sue. It was a name that would stick with the case for decades, as the young woman's identity proved frustratingly elusive. At the scene, police noted puzzling details. The victim's body was partially unclothed. However, an autopsy indicated that this was likely due to a violent struggle rather than an indecent assault. Her jewelry, including a plain ring and 2 pendant necklaces, remained on her. Strangely, the victim was barefoot, and her shoes were missing from the scene. Investigators later theorized that the perpetrator may have taken some of her clothing as a grim souvenir. An empty liquor bottle nearby hinted that alcohol might have been involved. This suspicion confirmed when the coroner's toxicology report showed the young woman was extremely intoxicated. From the outset, Sahara Sue, as Gwen was then known, presented unique challenges to investigators. She appeared to be a teenager or in her early 20s, yet one detail made her stand out: she had no natural teeth. The victim wore a full upper denture despite her youth, an extremely unusual circumstance for someone who would eventually be identified as a 19-year-old woman. They took fingerprints and compared them against national databases, but found no match. With no ID and no immediate hits on fingerprints, the young woman was buried in a local cemetery under her Jane Doe moniker. Over the years, they exhumed her remains more than once in hopes of finding new leads. In 2003, her body was exhumed to obtain DNA samples, but no matches turned up in databases. Investigators compared her DNA to that of at least 7 missing women who fit her profile, ruling out multiple potential identities. They even compared her to a missing woman in the same age range who was known to wear dentures. Given this unusual fact, investigators thought there was a good chance they may resolve her identity in 2003. Unfortunately, however, this wasn't a match, despite this very unusual similarity. The mystery endured for 44 years, until advances in DNA technology finally provided the answers investigators needed. In 2022, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Cold Case Unit teamed up with a private forensics lab, Othram, to apply cutting-edge genetic genealogical techniques. By late 2023, the painstaking work paid off, and investigators were led to a family in Ohio and to the name of a long-lost daughter. On December 19, 2023, authorities announced that Sahara Sue was formally identified as Gwen Marie Story. She was born in 1960 and grew up in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. Her family recounted to police that in the summer of 1979, 19-year-old Gwen decided to leave home on a quest to find her biological father in California. She had departed Cincinnati with two young male friends as traveling companions, hopeful for a fresh start on the West Coast. That was the last time her family ever saw her. According to what the friends later told Gwen's family, they did make it as far as Las Vegas, and that's where they left Gwen behind. The two men returned to Ohio in August 1979 without her, vaguely explaining that Gwen had stayed in Las Vegas on her own. The family never heard from Gwen again, and for 44 years they had no idea she was the unidentified victim in Nevada. Today, the death of Gwen's story remains unsolved, but the investigation has newfound momentum. Identifying her has opened fresh lines of inquiry for detectives, and they are actively pursuing several leads in an effort to finally name the perpetrator or perpetrators. One major avenue involves the two male friends who traveled with Gwen in 1979. Las Vegas police have stated that they are now turning their focus to those two individuals and trying to understand how Gwen wound up dead in Vegas after they left her. Another key lead centers on an unidentified man who was seen with Gwen shortly before her slaying. Back in 1979, during the initial investigation, police canvassed the area around the crime scene and discovered that a local liquor store clerk had seen the victim alive that night. The young woman matching Gwen's description had come into the store in the company of a man only a few hours before her body was found. This male companion was described as white, around 30 years old, approximately 6 feet tall with a thin build. Notably, the witness said the man sported a mustache that was a different color from the hair on his head, an odd detail that was incorporated into a police sketch at the time. Based on the timing and proximity, this unknown man is considered a suspect in Gwen's slaying, though he's never been identified. At present, detectives are essentially looking at two possibilities that may not be mutually exclusive. The first is that Gwen was harmed by a stranger she met in Las Vegas. The second is that she was harmed by someone she knew, perhaps one or both of her travel companions. There's always the potential that the scenarios intersect, and that she may have been trafficked by the original men, perhaps to the man she was seen with at the liquor store. That said, this is of course just speculation, and it's possible that the actual scenario of her final days is something completely different altogether. A red sports car sat abandoned on a Houston, Texas highway early on August 4th, 1992. Early bird commuters noticed the empty red Pontiac Fiero on the shoulder, its driver nowhere in sight. This is the dawn of a day that would mark the start of one of Houston's most perplexing cold cases. The car's driver is 23-year-old Tara Breckenridge, who vanished overnight, leaving behind her vehicle and countless questions. Tara was an aspiring photographer who moved from her hometown of Del Rio, Texas, to Houston after high school. To pay the bills, she worked as a waitress at what's been described as an upscale gentleman's establishment called the Men's Club, where the tips were good for an attractive woman. Friends said the job didn't really suit her, but it was a means to an end for her while she pursued her dreams. On the night of August 3rd, 1992, the Men's Club had an unusually slow evening. Management decided to send a couple of employees home early, and Tara did something uncharacteristic. She volunteered to clock out before closing. This surprised her co-workers, since Tara usually stayed until closing time to maximize her earnings. Just after midnight, around 12:30 a.m., she checked out and was escorted by a security guard to her car. Tara drove off into the warm Houston night, presumably heading toward the apartment she shared with her boyfriend, but she never arrived. When Tara's boyfriend, 21-year-old Wayne Hecker, got home around 5 a.m., he was alarmed to find she wasn't there. Wayne later told police he had been at a pool hall that night and assumed Tara would be home by the time he returned. Worried, he called a friend, and they began searching for her. They first checked the men's club with no sign of Tara. At dawn, retracing her route home, they spotted Tara's red Fiero abandoned on the shoulder of Interstate 610. The car was locked and neatly pulled over, but Tara herself was nowhere to be found. The scene raised more questions than answers. The car hadn't crashed, and it seemed deliberately parked on the roadside. The hazard lights were off, and the car's alarm wasn't activated. Inside, investigators found the can of mace that Tara always carried for protection. Finding her mace in the car was unsettling, as given the environment where she worked, she was known to keep it on her at all times. Its presence suggested she either left with someone she felt safe with, or she was taken by surprise so fast she didn't have a chance to defend herself. No other clues or signs of struggle were found at the scene. One mechanical clue did emerge. The car's alternator belt was missing. Without that belt, the Fiero's engine would have failed, explaining why Tara had to pull over. It's possible this was a simple mechanical failure. Perhaps the belt snapped on its own. But some have speculated that the breakdown was no accident, and that it may have been tampered with while she was working that night. Either way, Tara ended up stranded in the middle of the night, a situation that made her vulnerable to whoever might have come along. From the start, police suspected foul play since there was nothing to suggest Tara left by choice. Investigators immediately looked at those closest to Tara for answers. Wayne Hecker quickly became a focus of the investigation. His relationship with Tara had been under strain, and she had talked about leaving him at times. She was also supporting him financially at the time. Wayne claimed he was at a pool hall called Fat Freddy's until around 5 a.m. and insisted he had nothing to do with Tara's disappearance. But witness accounts didn't fully align with his story. People at the pool hall remembered Wayne stepping out around 1:45 and not returning until almost 3:30. That gap of nearly 2 hours overlapped with the time frame when Tara would have been at home, or potentially when she was still driving. In theory, it was enough time for him to leave, intercept Tara on the road, and then go back to the pool hall. This circumstantial window of opportunity kept suspicion on Wayne. Despite the suspicions, police found no hard evidence implicating Wayne. He cooperated with detectives and steadfastly denied any wrongdoing, professing that he loved Tara and would never harm her. Without evidence to connect him to a crime, he was never charged. Still, he was not officially cleared either, and he remained a person of interest simply because no better explanation emerged. Wayne passed away from cancer in 2015, taking any secrets he knew with him, if he did indeed know any secrets at all. Personally, I don't think the timeline with Wayne adds up that well. Tara left work at 12:30, and even if we accept that Wayne wasn't at the pool hall between 1:45 and 3:30, this makes it seem unlikely that he actually intercepted her. One interesting theory to explain this absence is that Wayne has been speculated to have been dealing in Colombian confetti at the time. He may have been busy working at the pool hall, so to speak, which may have been a quote-unquote innocent explanation for that missing time period. If this was the case, it makes sense that he couldn't have told the cops what he was doing during that period, even if he had nothing to do with Tara's disappearance. Also, let's turn to these pool hall eyewitnesses for a moment. I've been at pool halls around 2 a.m., and the one thing virtually no one is at that time is sober. It's very possible that alcohol, combined with the general atmosphere of late nights at a pool hall, just meant that people weren't really monitoring Wayne as closely as they thought they were. That said, on the flip side, this also means that he could have potentially got out earlier than eyewitnesses remember. At any rate, Wayne is deceased now, and given the complete lack of hard evidence at this time, any allegations that he was involved in any capacity are completely speculative. Another lead centered on a different man in Tara's life, or rather, a man who wished he was in her life. While searching Tara's room, police found a collection of love notes she had received. These letters were from a regular patron at the men's club who had become infatuated with Tara. He would give her very generous tips, sometimes $100 at a time, and in his notes, he professed deep feelings for her, even talking about marrying her. This discovery led investigators to wonder if this not-so-secret admirer could have followed Tara after work. Detectives tracked down the admirer and questioned him. In the end, they found nothing to indicate he was involved in Tara's disappearance. The man had an alibi and no history of violence. His letters, while obsessive, contained no threats, only pleas and romantic sentiments. By all accounts, he was heartbroken over Tara's vanishing and genuinely cooperative with the investigation. With no evidence tying him to the incident, the secret admirer was dropped as a suspect, and the case turned towards the likelihood of an unknown assailant. With those close to Tara yielding no answers, investigators faced the disturbing possibility that a stranger had targeted her. Numerous women working in the gentlemen's nightlife industry had been targeted in Houston in the 90s. If Tara fell victim to a predator that used these clubs as a hunting ground, she may have been marked long in advance. This individual might have tampered with her car at the club, ensuring that it would break down along her route so they could approach her under the pretense of offering help. In this scenario, Tara may have initially let her guard down, believing that this was a good Samaritan. Unfortunately, without any witnesses, this remains purely speculative. What actually happened to Tara still remains a disturbing unsolved mystery over 3 decades later. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Anyway, hope you're all having a great day. Let's get back to business. Imagine standing in a grand plaza of Pyongyang, gazing up at a towering bronze statue of a man who looms larger than life. Crowds of North Koreans approach in neat lines, carrying flowers and prostrating themselves at the statue's feet. Children nearby sing hymns of praise to this leader as if reciting prayers. Scenes like this, at once real and surreal, capture the cult of personality that has long surrounded Kim Il-sung, the founding leader of North Korea. His portrait hangs in every home. His titles include Great Leader and Son of the Nation, and even decades after his death, he remains North Korea's eternal president. Kim Il-sung was born in 1912 and was the architect of North Korea and its supreme ruler from 1948 until his death in 1994. In 1953, after the close of the war on the peninsula, he purged all dissenters from his ranks and consolidated his position as the great leader of North Korea. By the 1960s, everyday life in North Korea was dedicated to glorifying the great leader. Kim fashioned not just a regime, but a political religion centered on himself, ensuring he ruled unchallenged for 46 years and establishing a family dynasty that continues today. From the beginning of his tightening on the reins of power in the 1950s, propaganda and iconography have pervaded daily life. Giant portraits of Kim Il-sung adorned public buildings, and statues of him rose in every city and town. By one count, North Korea built around 80 large statues of Kim Il-sung and over 20,000 smaller ones nationwide, a density of monuments that reinforced his omnipresence. The most iconic is the massive bronze statue at the Mansudae Grand Monument in Pyongyang, where citizens are expected to bow and lay flowers in homage. Reverence for Kim is inculcated from childhood. Kindergarteners learn songs praising Father Kim Il-sung from their first day of school. In nursery schools, toddlers bow to Kim's portrait and thanked him for their snacks, literally saying, "Thank you, Father," as if he personally provided the food. These early rituals instilled a belief that all blessings flowed from the leader. People are taught to believe that Kim Il sung was capable of virtually superhuman feats. While he was a real leader against the Japanese, he's generally credited as being the sole organizing force of this partisan effort, according to the official state narrative. On the intellectual side of things, Kim Il sung is credited with writing over 10,000 books and speeches entirely by himself. Notably, while it's true that he does have over 10,000 works officially attributed to him by the North Korean state, it's likely that he had a bit of assistance along the way. North Korea has often been likened to an extreme religious cult, with Kim Il sung at its center as a divine figure. Many North Koreans indeed came to revere their leader with a faith-like fervor. One defector recalled that as a child, he believed Kim Il sung and his family were so perfect that they didn't even need to use the bathroom. The reasoning for this isn't that using the bathroom can be a bit dirty, but rather, their bodies could so perfectly process nutrients that there was no waste left over to produce. When Kim Il sung died in 1994, the depth of adulation became starkly evident. The nation plunged into an elaborate, state-orchestrated mourning. Crowds of distraught citizens wailed in the streets, perhaps out of fear of reprisal if they didn't, or perhaps out of genuine concern for their beloved leader. After all, these people had for generations come to believe that absolutely everything they have is the result of Kim Il sung's benevolence. And it's not like these North Koreans could look to their grandparents and ask what it was like to live a free life. Their grandparents had lived under brutal Japanese occupation, where the Korean people were subject to horrors beyond comprehension. To give just one example, thousands of Koreans were subject to disturbing human experimentation by Imperial Japan, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Kim Il sung was posthumously declared eternal president, and his embalmed body now lies preserved in a mausoleum where citizens still bow before him as if venerating a sacred relic. In every sense, Kim Il sung was, and remains, enshrined at the center of his nation's life. Several factors help explain how this all-encompassing cult of personality took root and endured in North Korea, though none fully explain the phenomenon. First, there was political necessity. In the early Cold War years, North Korea was a new state forged from colonial rule and devastated by conflict. Kim Il sung's regime needed to unite the populace and legitimize its rule. A personality cult proved to be a powerful tool for concentrating loyalty and authority in Kim alone. By enforcing total loyalty and subjugation to the great leader, the regime erased dissent and alternative centers of influence. Praising Kim became synonymous with patriotism and unity. Foreign influences played a role as well, providing some guidance for this new leader. Kim's cult of personality drew from Soviet and Chinese models, but he pushed them even further. Neither the Soviet or the Chinese leadership were ever so completely subservient to one individual as the North Koreans were to Kim Il sung. Equally important was Korean cultural tradition, particularly the Confucian ethos of filial piety and loyalty to authority. North Korean propaganda reframed these traditions to its advantage by presenting Kim Il sung as the benevolent father of the nation. In a society steeped in Confucian values, obedience to a father figure leader felt like a natural moral duty. The importance of family, a core Confucian value, was woven into the political ideology, merging with socialist collectivism and the Kim cult itself. Of course, China is the originator of these traditions, and it naturally begs the question why China, which started with a similar regime, didn't follow the same path. This is likely because the Chinese communists largely discarded tradition and tried to create a new order. Finally, psychological manipulation and isolation ensured the cult's persistence. From childhood onward, North Koreans have heard only one narrative: that Kim Il sung is the source of all good and the defender against every threat. With strict censorship blocking outside information, this singular narrative became deeply ingrained. Over time, the propaganda took on a spiritual fervor. Analysts note that the Kim cult exhibits distinctly religious characteristics, with intensely held beliefs and rituals treating the leader's mythic status as gospel truth. This indoctrination was enforced by fear as well. Anyone caught doubting or criticizing the official narrative faced severe punishment. In essence, to speak out against Kim Il sung isn't voicing a political difference. It's the equivalent of spreading heresy in a theocratic absolute monarchy. It's an insult to both a divine authority and to the temporal order. Kim Il sung's cult of personality has outlived the man himself. Even today, his smiling portrait still gazes down over Pyongyang's main square, and school children continue to learn patriotic songs and stories celebrating his exploits. The Kim Il sung cult became the template for his successors, his son Kim Jong-il and grandson Kim Jong-un, each wrapping themselves in the founder's aura. While these two men have been portrayed as godlike in their own right, they're ultimately portrayed as such because of their connection to Kim Il sung. I should also mention that studying the North Korean regime is extremely difficult due to the closed nature of the society. As such, our researchers can't just consult direct evidence on how or why the North Korean state chose to develop such an extreme cult of personality. In the end, why North Korea developed the cult of personality that it did remains an unsolved mystery that will be studied for generations to come. In the meantime, us outsiders will continue to watch North Korea with fascination as we observe a society that has increasingly become entirely unmoored from reality. Hidden beneath the peaceful greenery of Los Angeles' Elysian Park lies the legend of a buried fortune. This nearly 600-acre urban oasis, the city's oldest park, is rumored to conceal gold and jewels hidden away during turbulent times in the 19th century. It's a surprising setting for such a tale, not a remote jungle or pirate-infested island, but a public park near downtown Los Angeles. According to the lore, wealthy residents of the old town stashed their riches in these hills to protect them from an invading army. It sounds like the stuff of movies, but for over almost 2 centuries the tale has persisted, partly because it indeed has a historical basis. The legend's origin dates back to the Mexican-American conflict of the 1840s, when U.S. forces invaded California. As American troops neared Los Angeles in 1846, panic spread among the well-to-do families, who feared looting. Some of these wealthy families allegedly hid their gold, coins, and jewelry in what is now Elysian Park's rugged canyons. The remote ravines just outside the town offered convenient hiding spots, close enough to retrieve later, but far enough from soldiers' eyes. In reality, the war ended relatively quickly, and American occupation of Los Angeles didn't result in the widespread looting residents had feared. Many families likely dug up their treasure once the danger passed. But perhaps not all. Some who buried their wealth never returned, meaning their caches stayed in the ground. This possibility of unrecovered riches left behind is the spark that keeps the treasure legend alive. As early as 1896, newspapers were already reporting on adventurous souls digging for hidden riches in Elysian Park. Those early treasure seekers found nothing verifiable, but the legend persisted and gained new life in the late 20th century. By the 1980s, modern treasure hunters were on the case. They discovered a boulder with man-made holes and signs of an old tunnel nearby. Digging about 30 feet into a hillside, this team unearthed only a 1940s-era lantern battery and a length of frayed rope. This evidence indicated that someone had potentially beat them to the loot, but was confirmation that there were undocumented treasure hunts in the area previously. Though this expedition came up empty-handed, the team considered this proof that treasure had indeed been buried and had already been removed. Whether it was removed by the wealthy families back in the 1840s or by treasure hunters subsequently couldn't be said with any certainty. Despite the lack of concrete findings, the Elysian Park treasure remains a source of fascination. Most historians agree that the goods were mostly retrieved by their original owners once things had settled down. However, it does remain a possibility that some treasure was lost and covertly discovered in the last 2 centuries. Officially, no treasure has ever been discovered in the Elysian Park, but this hasn't stopped treasure seekers before, and likely won't stop them in the future. On a chilly Christmas night in 2007, the area outside of Phoenix, Arizona Mall played host to an unfathomable act of cruelty. A man was seen engulfed in flames outside a Subway restaurant as horrified bystanders rushed to call 911. That man was 36-year-old Aaron Taylor, a familiar homeless figure in the area who had just become the victim of a gruesome and senseless crime. Investigators are convinced they know who's responsible, but a lack of hard evidence and the silence of witnesses have kept the perpetrators out of the reach of justice. Aaron Taylor wasn't an anonymous drifter to those who worked near Paradise Valley Mall in Phoenix. Employees at the mall's eateries and shops knew him as a polite, friendly presence who often camped near the Subway restaurant on East Cactus Road. Aaron had come to Arizona from Oregon years earlier, and by all accounts was a gentle, considerate person who had a rough lot in life. Tragically, Aaron's final months were marked by torment. He had become the target of a group of local young men who took pleasure in bullying him as he tried to go about his life. Witnesses later told police that a trio of teens and young adults had been harassing Aaron for weeks before his death. These individuals lived in a nearby apartment complex, and they treated Aaron as a source of cruel entertainment. In the latter half of 2007, people saw Aaron being subjected to degrading quote-unquote pranks. In one instance, the criminals reportedly duct-taped Aaron to a bench in the mall courtyard, leaving him restrained and humiliated. On another occasion, they dragged him and threw him into a fountain for their amusement. A mall security guard even recalled seeing these men pouring liquids on Aaron and pushing him around in the months before the slaying. It was a pattern that grew increasingly violent over time, escalating with little intervention from bystanders or authorities. In Aaron's case, this pattern was a dire warning sign of the horror to come. While the harassment was known and widely witnessed, there was no sustained effort that successfully stopped the assaults. On the evening of December 25, 2007, while many families celebrated in warmth, Aaron Taylor settled in to sleep on his usual bench. It was a holiday evening like many others for him, cold and quiet, with a few passers-by and the glow of neon from nearby shops. Sometime that night, the same group who had been tormenting him decided to pay Aaron a visit. According to witness accounts pieced together later, 3 males approached Aaron in the courtyard as he rested. They brought drinks and snacks, perhaps trying to pretend they were in the Christmas spirit, or perhaps simply to toy with him. Several people saw the group chatting and sharing drinks with Aaron, almost as if they were hanging out casually. In fact, police would later find an assortment of items left behind: a half-empty bottle of whiskey, an unopened can of beer, and even a bag of Cheetos. It seemed the men were socializing with Aaron at first, perhaps lulling him into a sense of security. It turned out that this was just the setup for something unthinkably cruel. As darkness fell, What had appeared to be a quote-unquote friendly encounter turned into one of the most disturbing acts I've ever covered on this channel. Witnesses reported a horrifying sight. The young men began flicking lit matches at Aaron's long beard. When this sick game stopped being entertaining, they took things one step further. They doused Aaron in some sort of flammable liquid. Around 7 that night, a bystander saw flames erupting from the bench area and called 911 in alarm. In a matter of moments, Aaron was completely engulfed in fire. The attackers scattered, reportedly running off back toward their apartment, leaving Aaron to his horrific fate. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Mall security and a nearby convenience store clerk sprinted over and desperately tried to save Aaron, using their jackets to smother the flames that were consuming him. These good Samaritans fought frantically for several minutes, but the fire was too intense due to the flammable liquid Aaron had been doused with. When Phoenix Fire Department paramedics arrived, they found a harrowing sight: Aaron's body straddling the bench, still on fire. First responders extinguished the flames and rushed to perform CPR. They raced Aaron to the Maricopa County burn unit, but the injuries were catastrophic. He was officially pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. Later, the medical examiner's report confirmed the most chilling detail. Aaron had been alive throughout most of the ordeal, evidenced by soot in his airways from breathing in the smoke and flames. Aaron had been lit on fire and been forced to endure unimaginable horrors while fully conscious, for the amusement of 3 disturbed individuals who remain free. In the immediate aftermath, Phoenix police launched a full investigation, but they faced serious challenges from the start. The very act of attempting to save Aaron's life unfortunately destroyed much of the physical evidence at the scene. Firefighters had no choice but to douse the flames with water and foam, which inadvertently washed away potential forensic clues. Any traces like accelerant residue, blood, or fingerprints that might have been on Aaron's clothing or the bench were largely obliterated in the process of extinguishing the fire. Notably, while they recovered evidence, most of these items had been compromised by a mixture of heat, water, and foam. For instance, matchsticks that may have been used to ignite Aaron were too fire damaged to yield any DNA or fingerprints. Investigators scoured the area for surveillance footage, but frustratingly, none of the nearby shop's security cameras captured the secluded spot where it happened. The crime had effectively occurred in a blind spot with little forensic evidence. Eyewitness testimony became the crucial pillar of the investigation, since the physical evidence was lacking. And indeed, multiple people had seen parts of the incident or the events leading up to it. Several witnesses told police about the group of young men seen hanging around Aaron that night, providing descriptions of their actions. One witness specifically reported seeing the men laughing and flicking matches at Aaron shortly before the fire erupted. In the aftermath, someone came forward saying that one of the young men actually bragged afterward about the incident. All of these accounts painted a consistent and damning picture pointing to the same perpetrators. Crucially, people also noted that these were the same individuals who had been harassing Aaron for weeks prior. In the eyes of the Phoenix police, there was little mystery about who committed this sick act. The pattern of escalating attacks and eyewitness placements all pointed to those 3 young men as the culprits. While the police may have identified the likely perpetrators early on, turning that suspicion into an arrest proved daunting. A huge obstacle was the lack of cooperative witnesses willing to testify in court. Some bystanders who initially spoke to police grew hesitant to get further involved. It's been speculated that there may have been witness intimidation involved. When detectives brought in the 3 suspects for questioning, they hit a wall of silence. All 3 denied involvement, and as soon as police started pressing them with the witness accounts, the suspects lawyered up. According to the cops, The suspects' parents moved quickly to hire attorneys for their sons and advised them not to cooperate with investigators. With no confessions, no surveillance footage, no DNA, and only reluctant witnesses, the case stalled out. Prosecutors determined there just wasn't enough admissible evidence to confidently charge the suspects, even though the detectives strongly believed they had the right people. The prosecution only has one chance to pursue the case, so the idea that they would have taken it to trial without cooperative witnesses made the chances of success minimal. Also, of course, the lack of any usable forensic evidence posed a huge problem, especially since the witnesses stopped cooperating. The biggest mystery here isn't who did it, but rather how to finally hold the culprits accountable. Over the years, Phoenix detectives have revisited the case multiple times, hoping new evidence might surface, but as yet nothing has. In the end, it appears that the best chance for justice for Aaron Taylor will be if one of the men involved in the attack turns on the other two. Another potential possibility is if some very significantly degraded DNA can be reanalyzed to form a DNA profile. Even if only one individual can be tied to the crime, that's likely all that's needed. Using this method, the authorities may be able to put the full weight of the state on one individual and fully crack the case. Making a deal with one of the men may simply be the only way to realistically bring the other two to justice. Anyway, this case makes me absolutely sick. Hopefully these guys are caught and Aaron gets the justice he deserves. In the year 2000, at the bottom of the world, the remote Amundsen Scott Station, home to only a few dozen researchers, became the setting for one of Antarctica's most chilling mysteries. In May 2000, 32-year-old astrophysicist Rodney Marks collapsed and died under strange circumstances. More than 2 decades later, the question remains: was his poisoning a tragic accident or a disturbing crime carried out at the bottom of the world? Rodney Marks was an experienced Antarctic researcher working on a cutting-edge telescope project at the South Pole. He had his fiancée, Sonia Wolter, a maintenance specialist at the station, by his side. For Marks, Antarctica was almost a second home. He had wintered on the continent once before, and eagerly returned for this assignment. By all accounts, he was thriving in the harsh polar environment. He had close friends, meaningful work, and a wedding ahead. On May 11, 2000, during the long Antarctic winter, Marks returned from the observatory feeling ill. At first, he wondered if it was the usual strain of living at high altitudes in -80-degree darkness. But by early the next morning, it was clear something was wrong. Around 5:30 a.m. on May 12th, he woke up vomiting blood and in excruciating pain. He went to the station's medical clinic, where Dr. Robert Thompson tried to make sense of the baffling symptoms. Marks's joints and stomach burned, and his eyes were so sensitive he wore sunglasses despite the 24-hour night. Over that day, he returned to the doctor repeatedly as his condition deteriorated. He grew increasingly anxious and confused, even hyperventilating at one point, as the doctor struggled to find a cause. Baffled by the mysterious illness, Thompson even sought advice from other doctors via a satellite link, but nothing could save Marks in time. By that evening, Marks's condition had spiraled downward. After one last collapse, Dr. Thompson administered a sedative, which briefly calmed Marks. Moments later, he went into cardiac arrest, and at 6:45 that evening, he was declared deceased. The shock among the 49 people wintering at the South Pole was immense. A healthy young colleague was gone, and no one understood why. And because no plane could land during winter, his body couldn't be evacuated for months. In a horrific twist, the body had to be kept in a frozen storage room on site until flights could resume. During that time, no autopsy would be conducted. In late October 2000, after the months-long polar night ended, a plane finally evacuated Rodney Marks's body to New Zealand for autopsy. There, a forensic pathologist made a disturbing observation. Marks had died from acute methanol poisoning. About 150 milliliters of methanol, roughly a glassful, was found in his system. Methanol is a colorless, sweet alcohol used as a cleaning solvent, and even a small amount can be deadly. He had been poisoned by a substance no one would ingest on purpose. The revelation sent shockwaves through the polar science community. What had seemed a tragic medical mystery was now potentially a crime. By the time the poison was identified, 6 months had passed, and any evidence at the station was likely long gone. If someone had slipped methanol into his drink, the remote setting and delayed discovery gave the culprit a huge head start. If Marks somehow dosed himself accidentally, proving it would be just as difficult. Those who lived with him at the pole were left to wonder if one of their own was a perpetrator, or if a terrible mistake was to blame. An intentional act such as this at the South Pole would have potentially been unprecedented. There was a case in 1959 of a Soviet researcher striking a comrade in science with an ice climbing pick, but it's unclear if that attack was fatal or not. If it wasn't lethal, Rodney may have been the first known case of an intentional Antarctic slaying. The investigation fell to New Zealand authorities. The Amundsen Scott Station lies in Antarctica's Ross Dependency, a sector claimed by New Zealand, so a coroner in Christchurch opened an inquest into Marks's death. The coroner had to navigate Antarctica's legal gray zone, since New Zealand's territorial claim was not recognized by the United States. This meant he could only request help, rather than compel it legally. The U.S. National Science Foundation and its contractor Raytheon Polar Services provided only limited cooperation. The coroner had difficulty obtaining records and interviews from the American-run base. He got the NSF to send questionnaires to all 49 people at the station, but only 13 responded. No physical evidence, like a tainted container, could be found so long after the fact. The NSF claimed to have done its own investigation, but released no findings to the New Zealand police. This lack of transparency strained U.S.-New Zealand relations and made it nearly impossible to reconstruct what happened. Marks's family, too, was frustrated by the lack of answers and communication from those in charge of the base. Ultimately, the investigation was closed in 2008, with the coroner's inquest remaining completely inconclusive. The coroner advised that on the basis of the limited evidence he could gather, it was almost certain that Marks didn't do it intentionally. The coroner thought the most likely cause was an intentional poisoning event, or accidental consumption on the part of Marks. More than 20 years later, the South Pole poisoning of Rodney Marks remains Antarctica's most perplexing cold case, by virtue of the fact that it's the only cold case on the continent. No culprit or definitive explanation has ever been found, and those who might know the truth have never spoken. On a Halloween night in a quiet Northern California suburb, a Placer County Sheriff's deputy noticed an abandoned Dodge Caravan on a roadside. Inside the vehicle was a scene out of a nightmare. The lifeless body of 39-year-old Sherilyn Hockley, a beloved fifth-grade teacher, lying in the back seat. The shocking discovery on October 31st, 1993, shattered the peace of Granite Bay and launched an investigation that has haunted the community for decades. Over 30 years later, Sherilyn's slaying remains unsolved. Sherilyn Hockley was a mother of 3 and an admired teacher who had recently moved to the Granite Bay area after a divorce. On Friday, October 29, 1993, her elementary school hosted Halloween festivities, and Sherilyn stayed late to clean up after the classroom party. She was last seen at the school sometime between 5 and 6 p.m. Sherilyn reportedly planned to head to her boyfriend's house that evening, but she never arrived. When Sherilyn didn't come home that night, her boyfriend grew alarmed. He drove to the school around 7:30 p.m. looking for her and even spoke with a janitor, but found no sign of Sherilyn or her van. As concern mounted, he contacted family and the authorities to report her missing. Her disappearance was entirely out of character. Sherilyn was reliable and deeply devoted to her family and her students. As the weekend passed with no word from her, family and friends feared the worst while clinging to hope. Their worst fears were confirmed on Halloween night. On October 31st, a sheriff's deputy on routine patrol noticed Sherilyn's blue Dodge minivan sitting oddly alongside Elmhurst Drive, just about a mile from the school. Numerous local residents had actually seen the van parked there throughout the weekend while attending kids' soccer games. Some assumed it was merely an abandoned vehicle, while others assumed someone may have been living in it. Either way, no one approached the van at that time. When the deputy stopped to check it out, he made a gruesome discovery. Sherilyn's body was in the back of the van. She was partially clothed and had been strangled with a ligature, left lifeless in her own vehicle. Detectives from the Placer County Sheriff's Office descended on the scene, trying to piece together what had happened to the well-liked teacher. The evidence painted a perplexing picture. Sherilyn had clearly been strangled, likely with a rope or cord, but that weapon wasn't found wrapped around her neck. Investigators recovered a piece of rope believed to be the weapon used in the attack, preserving it for forensic testing. Crucially, the crime didn't fit the pattern of a random attack. Sherilyn's purse, wallet, and personal belongings were still inside the van, untouched. Tests to determine if she had been subjected to an indecent assault came back negative as well. The location of the van and condition of the scene raised further questions. Detectives theorized that Sherilyn may not have been slain at the spot where the van was found. There were no signs of a struggle in that wooded roadside area, and no clear secondary crime scene was ever identified nearby. It seemed likely that the assailant subdued Sherilyn elsewhere, perhaps even in the school parking lot. He then drove her van to the quiet street where it was abandoned with her body inside. Investigators believe Sherilyn was slain on Friday evening, the 29th, or early the next morning, and the perp left the van in plain sight. It's believed that he had hoped it would blend in for some time until the body was discovered. Forensic teams combed over the vehicle for clues. They lifted fingerprints, but unfortunately none of the prints matched any known person in law enforcement databases. No DNA profile was immediately obtained in 1993, as DNA testing was limited at the time, but evidence was carefully stored. The investigation faced a daunting challenge: a crime with no obvious motive, few physical leads, and a victim who by all accounts had no enemies. In any case like this, investigators start by looking at those closest to the victim. Sherilyn's recent personal life was scrutinized for clues. She had finalized a divorce earlier that year after a 15-year marriage, and her 3 children were living with their father in Chico, California after the split. Detectives interviewed her ex-husband and her current boyfriend, and both men were cooperative. After checking alibis and finding no evidence of involvement, police cleared the ex-husband and the boyfriend of any suspicion early on. Eliminating these 2 key figures was important, but it also meant the case had no obvious suspect to follow. Investigators cast a wider net. They looked into colleagues at the school and any other men in Sherilyn's life, but nothing pointed to a specific person with motive. The principal of her school noted that Sherilyn appeared to have a good personal life. In fact, Colleagues recalled that on the day she disappeared, Sherilyn was in an upbeat mood, excited about the Halloween weekend, and enjoying time with her students. With those closest to Sherilyn yielding no leads, police pursued scenarios with strangers. One early tip involved reports of an unknown man seen hanging around the school parking lot in a Volkswagen on the day Sherilyn vanished. This raised suspicions of a possible stalker or would-be abductor. It's unclear whether this individual was ever tracked down, with some sources claiming he was cleared and others claiming he was never found. It appears to me that he was likely never found, since the cops released a forensic sketch based on the description of the man. Another avenue was the possibility of a serial offender. Just 2 years prior, in 1991, a woman named Cindy Wanner had been kidnapped and strangled in the same general area of Placer County. This case also remains unsolved to this day, but the cops were unable to find any connection between the two. Over time, two broad main theories about Sherilyn's case have emerged. Either she was slain by someone she knew in a personal crime of passion, or she was the victim of a random attack by an unknown predator. The prevailing theory, however, is that Sherilyn likely knew the perpetrator, given the lack of theft or other clear motivations for the crime. The only motive for the attack, based on the evidence as it exists, appears to have been ending the life of an innocent woman. Notably, in one quote from a 2015 interview, a detective working the case indicated that the name of the suspect was likely somewhere in the case file. Since it's an active and ongoing investigation, nothing further was said beyond this cryptic statement. Notably, it's not entirely clear whether the rope found at the scene has produced a DNA profile in the intervening years. It's also unclear if the rope found was even the weapon used in the commission of the crime, and again, given the status of the investigation, we don't have all the details. For now, the unsolved case of Sherilyn Hockley continues to haunt her family and investigators. Sherilyn's adult children are still advocating for justice, which definitely increases the chance that this case will be cracked eventually. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon if you want to help support my channel even further. On a calm February night in 1975, two young boys in Kofu, Japan stumbled upon something that defied explanation. As dusk fell, they watched a strange orange light dancing in the sky, a light that soon descended behind a vineyard, bringing them face to face with the unknown in their own backyard. What began as a playful outing would become one of Japan's most baffling close encounters, leaving a community grasping for answers. By the end of that night, the two children had experienced something that remains unexplained even today. On February 23, 1975, around 6:30 in the evening, two 7-year-old boys, Masato Kawano and Katsuhiro Yamahata, were roller skating in Kofu City. While they were enjoying the evening, they noticed not one but two glowing saucer-shaped objects hovering above. The UFOs emitted a glittering orange light and a strange ticking sound. As the boys watched in awe, one of the lights suddenly veered off toward a distant mountain, while the other descended into a nearby vineyard. Curious and alarmed, the children ran to the vineyard. Up close, they found a domed metallic craft about 20 feet wide and 7 feet tall, resting on 3 spindly legs. Strange symbols were etched along its silvery hull. As they hesitantly approached, a hatch opened and a small humanoid figure clambered down a ladder to the ground. The boys also glimpsed a second, smaller figure inside the craft's cockpit, watching from above. The being on the ground stood only about 4 feet tall, with long, thin arms, a large head, and a reflective silver suit that seemed to glow. Its skin was dark brown and deeply wrinkled, obscuring any eyes or nose on its face. Where a mouth should be, it had three shiny metal fang-like projections pointing down. The creature even had pointed bat-like ears jutting from its head. It moved slowly around the craft, seemingly unaware of the two stunned boys. Without warning, the humanoid turned and walked directly toward Katsuhiro. Before the boy could run, the entity placed a hand on his shoulder, patting him twice. It emitted an eerie warbling noise, a garbled sound unlike any human language they had ever heard. At that moment, Katsuhiro collapsed to the ground, paralyzed, whether from terror or some effect of the touch. Panicked, Masato grabbed his friend and they fled from the vineyard as fast as they could. Breathless and shaking, the boys burst into their homes and told their parents an incredible story of a flying saucer and its frightening occupant. Skeptical but concerned, the mothers accompanied the boys back to the vineyard. They arrived just in time to see an orange light pulsing among the grapevines, right at the spot the children had pointed out. Moments later, the light blinked rapidly and then shot straight up into the sky, vanishing with a flash. In the silence that followed, the adults found physical signs that something had been there. The wooden posts of two grapevines were snapped off at the base, seemingly knocked over by a heavy force. In the soil, there was a ring of small depressions, as if left by the craft's legs, and some reports noted unusual radiation readings in the ground. By the next day, word of the Kofu UFO was spreading through the town. Classmates, neighbors, and teachers all heard about the boys' encounter. The school principal and several teachers visited the site in daylight to investigate. They confirmed the uprooted posts and strange landing marks in the soil. The two boys were interviewed separately by parents, teachers, and even an investigator, but their accounts didn't waver. They described the same events each time and drew matching pictures of the saucer and creature. Another child, an 8-year-old boy from the area, came forward to say he saw a bright orange object flying in the sky around the same time, though he hadn't seen it land. This independent sighting added credibility to the story and suggested something unexplained was indeed in the skies over Kofu that evening. News of this eerie encounter quickly spread beyond Kofu, fueling excited newspaper headlines and prompting official attention. UFO enthusiasts believed the boys had a genuine close encounter with an extraterrestrial, citing the consistency of their story and the physical evidence at the site. On the other side, skeptics proposed more ordinary explanations. Some suggested the children had misidentified a known object. Notably, the Japanese Civil Aviation Bureau pointed out that a propeller airplane was flying in the area that evening, and its lights could have been what the boys saw. However, this explanation didn't directly account for the bizarre humanoid encounter on the ground. Others theorized that the story could have been a childhood fantasy or prank that gained a life of its own. Young kids do have vivid imaginations, and some believe Masato and Katsuhiro could have concocted an alien encounter story based on a TV show or comic book. That said, reports indicate that they were genuinely frightened and earnest about what they reported. Moreover, the broken posts and corroborating witnesses made it hard to dismiss the incident as pure make-believe. This has led to the theory that the encounter could have been a hoax perpetrated by adults on these kids. No evidence of a hoax ever surfaced, and the boys never retracted their account into adulthood. Without a definitive explanation, the Kofu incident remains an unsolved mystery. Some have even speculated about a secret military experiment or an unknown creature mistaken for an alien, but none of these ideas fits all the facts. The story of what happened in that vineyard in 1975 continues to intrigue and mystify people to this day. On a quiet Sunday morning, 69-year-old Dr. Emmett Velton invited a man he barely knew into his home. Hours later, Velton lay fatally injured in the hallway of his Phoenix, Arizona condominium, and the stranger had vanished with his car. The entire encounter, from their arrival to the suspect's exit, was captured on surveillance video, yet this vicious attack remains unsolved. It's a chilling case, likely of goodwill turned tragic, and it continues to baffle investigators and haunt the community. Emmett Velton was a respected psychologist known for his work in cognitive behavioral therapy and addiction recovery. Originally from Tennessee, he had made Phoenix his home for the last 11 years of his life. On April 24, 2011, Easter Sunday morning, Velton crossed paths with a young homeless man in downtown Phoenix. Around 8:10 that morning, security cameras at Velton's high-rise condo recorded him entering the building with the unknown young man by his side. The footage, later retrieved by detectives, showed Velton and the man walking together from the parking area where Velton's Toyota RAV4 was parked, into the lobby. Tragically, this encounter would soon turn very violent. Roughly 3 hours later, Velton was discovered collapsed in a hallway near the elevator, suffering from a severe head injury. It appeared he had been beaten and left for dead. By the time help arrived, the young man was gone, along with Velton's car, which had been driven away from the scene. Velton was rushed to the hospital, and despite initially clinging to life long enough to speak to officers, he succumbed to his injuries on May 3, 2011. Phoenix police launched an intensive investigation into Dr. Velton's slaying. From the very start, they had more evidence than many other cases, giving hope that a quick arrest could be made. Within hours, detectives hit evidentiary pay dirt. A prime suspect was clearly visible on camera, accompanying Velton on the morning of the crime. Investigators obtained multiple angles of surveillance footage capturing the suspect's face and build as he walked with Velton into the building. In addition, the crime scene yielded a critical forensic clue. The perpetrator had stepped in Velton's blood and left behind a clean, bloody footprint in the apartment. This bloody shoe print was carefully lifted by crime scene technicians, preserved as key evidence. Velton himself provided a crucial lead before losing consciousness. He described his attacker as a young white male and revealed that he had picked the man up from a homeless shelter downtown. Using that information and the video images, police circulated a description of the suspect to the public and local shelters. Unfortunately, the description wasn't overly specific, describing him as being of both average height and weight, and white. The suspect was last seen on video calmly leaving the building and driving off in Velton's Toyota RAV4, presumably right after the attack. Velton's vehicle was later found abandoned in another part of town soon after. Despite this abundance of evidence, identifying the perpetrator proved challenging. Investigators had no name to match the blurry face on the video, and initial efforts to recognize him were fruitless. Police showed the footage and description around the shelter and other local agencies, but no one could identify the young man, suggesting he might have just been passing through. Physical evidence, while helpful, didn't directly point to a known individual. The bloody shoe print revealed the tread pattern and likely shoe size, but without a suspect to compare, it remained just an intriguing clue. As mentioned, the cops recovered Velton's car and presumably fully processed it. It may have contained fingerprints or DNA, but if so, the details were never released publicly, which isn't unusual given this is an active and ongoing investigation. Several theories as to why this unknown attacker targeted Dr. Velton have emerged in this case, none of which have been verified. The leading theory is that Velton was the victim of a robbery gone wrong. Being generous and trusting, he gave a ride to a young man who then attacked him, possibly intending to steal valuables or the car. The fact that the suspect fled in the victim's vehicle, and that Velton's wallet and other items were reportedly left untouched, suggests the car may have been the primary target. In this scenario, the slaying may not have been premeditated. It could have occurred because Velton resisted, or the assailant saw an opportunity and turned violent impulsively. Notably, Dr. Velton was known to the local homeless population as someone who was charitable and kind. It may be the case that this reputation worked its way to the wrong person, who saw Dr. Velton as an easy mark. Given the ease with which the attacker functioned after committing a horrific crime, some have speculated that this wasn't his first rodeo. Another theory which has been discussed online but isn't substantiated with any actual evidence is the theory that Dr. Velton may have tried to hook up with the homeless man. Dr. Velton was openly gay, which appears to have led to this theory gaining significant traction. However, despite the popularity of this theory, there's some major problems with it. Police canvassed the homeless population extensively, and there's no evidence that Dr. Velton had been engaged in such activities previously. It seems unlikely that a 69-year-old man would wake up one day and decide to start cruising around the local homeless shelters. If this had been his thing, it seems likely that people would have mentioned it when the police came sniffing around. Further, Dr. Velton was able to give some evidence before he perished, and presumably he would have mentioned this to investigators. Further, the cops fully investigated Dr. Velton's history and interviewed his closest friends. According to news reports, they couldn't explicitly say that he never engaged in such behavior, but no one ever reported that he did. A number of theories exist about the assailant, too. Investigators believe the perpetrator may not have been a local Phoenix resident at all. Since no one at the shelter or in the local homeless community recognized him, it's theorized he was a transient drifter passing through the city. He might have arrived in Phoenix shortly before Easter 2011 and left immediately after the crime. Another theory suggests that he perhaps was known by people who attended local homeless shelters, but that his reputation forced people into silence. Given the extreme act he committed against Dr. Velton, this doesn't seem to be an inherently unreasonable idea. Another line of speculation is that the suspect could have been mentally unstable or under the influence of street pharmaceuticals, leading to a sudden violent outburst. Perhaps the attacker wasn't primarily motivated by theft, but by an imagined provocation. For instance, Dr. Velton may have said something that triggered the attacker, even if it was completely benign. However, given the suspect's apparent composure on video, calmly walking in and later driving away, many believe greed was the motive more than rage. The theft of the car indicates a clear intent to gain from the crime, rather than an unplanned scuffle gone wrong. However, on the flip side, it appears that he simply abandoned the vehicle, so perhaps this was just his way of getting as far from the scene as fast as possible before the crime was discovered. That said, his rapid flight from the crime scene and his forethought to abandon the vehicle before an all-points bulletin went out for it suggests this was a man who was thinking ahead. As of today, the case of Emmett Velton remains unsolved, with little to no progress having been made in the last decade and a half. Whether this case is ever solved or not will likely depend on whether the cops were able to get DNA evidence from the scene. If there was biological evidence found from the perpetrator, it seems to be only a matter of time before forensic science catches up with him. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, don't forget to check out my podcast, merch store, and more by clicking the links in the description. On a quiet autumn morning in October 2012, a man walking along Zhinjan Beach in Split, Croatia, noticed an unbearable stench coming from a discarded plastic bag. Inside, to his shock, was a rotting leg. This grisly discovery marked the start of one of Split's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. A dismembered John Doe, whose remains would soon surface on two different beaches. Over a decade later, both the victim's name and his perpetrator remain unknown. The gruesome nature of the crime stunned the community at large and spurred an exhaustive police investigation, yet every lead only deepened the mystery. The first body part was found on October 8, 2012, when a passerby at Zinyan Beach stumbled upon a severed leg inside a plastic bag. This leg was confirmed to be human almost immediately, sparking the initial investigation. Just over a week later, on October 16th, another gruesome find was reported across town at the Zenta Harbor. A partially decomposed human torso was spotted wedged in the rocks of a marina breakwater. The torso had arms attached but was missing its head and both legs, clearly linking it to the earlier discovery. The following day, police divers searching the waters near that spot recovered the victim's head, which had been wrapped in newspaper and placed in its own plastic sack. No other remains were ever located despite extensive searches. All the recovered remains were sent for forensic examination, which confirmed they belonged to one individual. Investigators extracted a DNA profile from the victim's tissue and bone, but it didn't match anyone in Croatia's DNA databases. Fingerprints were also lifted from the plastic bag that held the head, offering a potential clue to the perpetrator, but these prints were of poor quality. The autopsy shed further light on the crime. The medical examiner determined that the John Doe likely died from severe chest injuries before being dismembered. He had multiple broken ribs. Early reports noted at least 8 fractures, as well as a broken collarbone and numerous bruises on his body, all inflicted while he was still alive. According to the coroner, these traumatic injuries suggested that the man either suffered a vicious beating or a catastrophic fall. However, given the subsequent events, the investigators were very clear that even if this was a fall, he didn't do it intentionally. The advanced state of decomposition made it difficult to determine how long the victim had been dead. Pathologists estimated he could have died anywhere from about 1 month to as much as a year before the remains were discovered. A forensic analysis was commissioned to try to figure out how the man appeared in life. The reconstruction showed an older white male who was balding and had short gray hair. He was likely around 5'10", and the investigation indicated he had significant dental work done in the past. Medical examiners also noted signs of kidney and heart disease, suggesting he was in poor health and possibly had mobility issues. These clues painted a picture of a man in his 60s or 70s who lived a quiet, perhaps housebound life. Armed with the composite sketch and physical details, Split police appealed to the public for help in identifying the unknown man. They urged citizens to consider whether any elderly male neighbor or relative had gone missing from their community. This focus on immobile seniors was based on the investigators' hunch that the victim had been frail and largely homebound. If such a person quietly disappeared, it might not immediately spark suspicion from neighbors or relatives. The perpetrator may have been able to simply pass it off as an instance where the man perished naturally, and given his poor health, further questions were unlikely to be raised. Despite exhaustive efforts, by the end of 2012, the case had grown cold. Not a single useful clue had been found, and the investigators' frustration grew as every potential lead hit a dead end. Over the years, several theories have emerged about what might have happened. Investigators strongly suspect that this man was targeted by someone he knew, most likely a caregiver. Indeed, police noted that the John Doe appeared to have led a very isolated life in Split or its outskirts, which would make it easier for his absence to go unnoticed for a long time. This profile supports the idea that the perpetrator took advantage of the man's solitude and vulnerability. Some have speculated that the motive could have been financial, for example, concealing the death to continue collecting the man's pension or for an inheritance. Another idea suggests that the reason why the man hasn't been discovered is that he wasn't a local at all. Split is an extremely popular vacation destination. It's possible that someone from elsewhere in Europe may have brought their elderly relative to Split under the auspices of a sunny vacation. During the vacation, this relative may have slain this elderly man and then covered it up using macabre techniques. This theory also has elements of the previous ideas discussed, since it may provide a convenient excuse for why someone is gone. If an elderly and unwell person from, say, France or Germany died on vacation in Croatia, this may not raise too many eyebrows back home from other relatives. Notably, this seems to be a case that would be ripe for solving with genetic genealogy if it happened in the United States or Canada. That said, it happened in Europe, and the laws surrounding genetic genealogy are different, so perhaps the Split John Doe case will remain sadly unsolved. At dusk, a single ripple on Arkansas's White River can spark a legend. For over a century, locals have whispered that something huge lurks beneath its muddy waters, a hulking gray beast, the so-called White River Monster. Rumors of a strange creature in the White River date back at least to the turn of the 20th century. An Arkansas newspaper in 1912 reported that lumbermen saw a massive, boulder-like thing at the bottom of the river which suddenly moved, convincing them it was a giant turtle. Over the next decade, a few other witnesses claimed to see an animal with gray, crusty skin blowing water into the air. These local tales remained obscure until the summer of 1937, when the monster exploded into national news. In July 1937, near Newport, Arkansas, farmer Bramlett Bateman rushed to the White River after his farmhands alerted him that something enormous had risen from the water. Bateman later described the creature as wide as a car and 3 cars long, with a smooth, wrinkled hide like that of an elephant. He wasn't alone. At least 3 other locals attested to the same sight. As word spread, the elusive beast earned the nickname Whitey. Newport soon caught monster fever, and the town quickly built a viewing platform on the riverbank and charged 25 cents admission to crowds of sightseers. Reporters and thrill seekers poured in, giving the town a much-needed influx of cash during the Depression. The White River Monster became a media sensation. A scuba diver was even hired to search the deep pool where Whitey was seen, but after several dives into the murky water, he came up empty-handed. Some experts suggested at the time the creature was nothing more than an oversized fish, perhaps an alligator gar or giant catfish, or even a floating log stirred by bubbles. By late July, with no definitive proof, the frenzy died down. The mysterious creature slipped out of the headlines, leaving behind only stories and a newfound local legend. The White River Monster stayed quiet, or at least out of the news, for the next few decades, but it simmered below the surface, growing into an Arkansas urban legend. It surfaced again in the early 1970s. In 1971, fresh reports from Newport reignited interest. Several locals claimed they saw a gray, humped creature in the river that summer. One man even snapped a blurry photo of a spiny-backed hump in the water, and soon afterward, enormous 3-toed footprints were found pressed in the river mud. Also, while I do have the photograph taken at the time on the screen right now, this is one where I really can't recommend that you take a look if you aren't already doing so. There does appear to be something there that could technically be described as humps, but the photograph is simply too blurry to be useful at all. I suppose that's par for the course for cryptid photography, though. At any rate, despite the grainy nature of the photo, excitement swept the area once more. In 1973, Arkansas's legislature declared part of the White River a White River Monster Refuge, legally protecting the creature within that stretch. By 1974, the sightings had stopped as abruptly as they began, and the monster once again slipped back into obscurity. Dozens of theories have bubbled up over the years. One popular biological theory holds that the monster was actually a known animal misidentified in an unfamiliar environment. For instance, some researchers point to the Florida manatee as a likely candidate. Manatees are massive, often 10 to 15 feet long, weighing over 1,000 pounds, and have smooth gray or nearly white skin. They also make loud blowing sounds when coming up for air, just like witnesses reported of the monsters. Notably, manatees can tolerate fresh water and sometimes wander far from Florida. There's historical precedent for this too, and one even swam to Memphis in 2006 before sadly perishing. A lost manatee in Arkansas could explain a lot. The creature's size, color, and tendency to surface and roll in the water would absolutely fit this cryptid. Many locals also favor the idea of an enormous alligator snapping turtle, a native river creature with a spiky shell and hefty body that could resemble a monster. Even so, the largest snapping turtles on record are still far smaller than a car-sized beast described in the White River Monster urban legend. Of course, there's always the chance that the White River Monster was more imagination than reality, a mix of exaggerated sightings and hoaxes. The 1937 monster craze gave Newport a welcome boost during times of economic hardship, so some believe the hype was deliberately encouraged for publicity. This may have explained the genesis of the urban legend, and from there people began to believe they really saw this fantastical creature. To this day, the White River Monster remains an unsolved mystery. What's certain is that the monster has left a lasting mark on Arkansas lore. Interestingly, some people have also added to the lore by claiming early American settlers or Native Americans interacted with the creature. These, however, appear to be definite later fabrications to give the story more of an air of reality. Interestingly, Newport and the surrounding region still embrace the legend with local festivals, museum exhibits, and an official refuge along the river. If the White River Monster was a hoax drummed up during the Depression to boost the economy, it's still paying dividends almost a century later.